Hello and good day. My name is William Quaterio with the FSW Writing Center, and on today's Grammar Corner we will be discussing misplaced or dangling modifiers. Now, what is a dangling or misplaced modifier? A dangling or misplaced modifier is a common grammatical error that even experienced writers can fall into. A dangling modifier is a modifying word or phrase that is missing its subject, or is a case where the subject is ambiguous or missing in relation to the modifier. Now, before we can get into dangling and misplaced modifiers proper, it may be useful to first define what a modifier is. A modifier is a word or phrase that modifies a sentence's meaning, usually with the purpose of adding a more descriptive layer so that the sentence communicates more and clearer detail and purpose. An example of a correct modifier in a sentence. First, we start with the fairly simple sentence, I own a cat. Now, if we wanted to add more detail, that is to say, more modifiers to that sentence so it is more specific and more descriptive and therefore gives the reader more information, we could rephrase it as follows. I own a mean cat who likes to bite and scratch. In this example, the modifiers mean and who likes to bite and scratch modify the original sentence, I own a cat, by adding more information about the cat. The adjective mean is a modifier, that is a single word that modifies, while the relative clause, who likes to bite and scratch, is a modifier phrase, or a phrase that modifies. The second modified sentence is more descriptive and more specific. That is the ultimate purpose of modifiers. We'll now move on to an example of incorrect uses of modifiers. What does a dangling modifier look like and why is it a problem? Dangling modifiers, as I mentioned on the previous slide, are modifiers that lack a clear subject that is being modified. Dangling modifiers are undesirable because they inhibit clarity and can leave readers confused. There are two broad types for this error: the distant modifier and the missing subject. The distant modifier is when the modifying word or phrase is too far away from the subject being modified, and the missing subject is when a modifying word or phrase outright lacks a subject to modify. Now we'll move on to some examples, starting with the distant modifier. Now an example here of a distant modifier was, Betty was angry with Archie when he returned her shattered compact with a mood of total indifference. Now what's the problem here? The distance between the subject Archie and the modifier phrase with a mood of total indifference is potentially confusing. It makes it sound like the shattered compact had the mood of total indifference instead of the subject that the writer intended to modify, Archie. Now, how do we fix this? You have a couple of options. One is to insert the modifier with a total mood of indifference as a subordinate clause earlier in the sentence, closer to the subject that needs to be modified, which in this case is Archie. So doing that, we could rephrase that as, Betty was angry at Archie when he, with a mood of total indifference, returned her shattered compact. Another option we have to fix it is to make the modifying phrase a separate independent clause or sentence. Doing that, we would end up with the following compound sentence. Betty was angry with Archie when he returned her shattered compact. He did so with a mood of total indifference. In this case, the modifying phrase is converted into an independent clause that makes it clear what is being modified. In this case, Archie represented in the second independent clause as he. Basically, the gist of it, to fix a distant modifier, is to make sure the modifier is close to the subject being modified. Pretty straightforward, I think. Now we move on to the second type, the missing subject. An example of a sentence with a missing subject. Walking down the busy city street, the noise was very distracting. Now what's the problem with this sentence? The participle phrase, walking down the busy city street, is supposed to be acting as a modifier, but the subject it should be modifying is missing. Who is walking down the street? We don't know. The way the sentence is presently phrased, it almost sounds like the noise is doing the walking, which is obviously impossible. And to fix Again, we have a couple of options. We could add a subject to the first clause here, turning it into a proper subordinate clause as well as a relative clause. We could say, when Veronica was walking down the busy city street, the noise was very distracting. In this case, we know it was Veronica walking down the busy street. It turns it into a proper subordinate clause, which supplements the independent clause, the noise was very distracting. Another option we have is we could perhaps unify the two clauses or phrases into one coherent sentence that eliminates the ambiguity of who is doing the walking. The noise on the busy city street was very distracting for anyone walking down it. Communicates the exact same information. Now there is no ambiguity. Now, I hope you found that useful and edifying. If you would like to learn more about modifiers and the hazards of dangling modifiers, I can direct you to my principal sources for this slide presentation. The Grammarly.com blog post on how to eliminate dangling modifiers from your writing, and the blog post on what modifiers in general are. And of course, I will note that we here at the FSW Writing Center are on hand to help you during our regular hours. By all means, either come in person or via Zoom. We'll be happy to help you with issues pertaining to what I just discussed, as well as any other concerns you might have with your writing. So, good luck and Godspeed.